also can't see what Emo can see because Emo's not looking at what Emo can see. So
we're ready.
So we're now live, so I can tell you that. Without looking at it, I know that's the case.
Whoops.
Let me look at it again. Oh, it's delayed, but like, doesn't matter.
We never really make use of that, like 30-second obscenity filter, do we?
Well, what would you do in those 30 seconds?
Do we have it?
Duct tape your mouth? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it actually an intentional delay? I thought it was just signal.
No, it's just the signal delay from YouTube. So, but that, even if something happens, like, what's the worst they can do? Like, I mean, how bad of a profanity can you issue that we would shut down the stream?
I don't speak German, so I don't know. Let's hit us.
Fair point. All right, so let's look at this guy again, because last time we tried to finish it, but we didn't.
I'm sure Polish also has some problems.
Let me zoom out a little bit, maybe, so we actually have a chance. Do the older members of this room still able to see the API?
I have a 20/20 vision.
Okay.
I'm close to the screen.
I can put my glasses on to read.
Good. I think I will order some binoculars for our reviews, so we can all enjoy
I can't
this.
remember where we left off on this.
Well, we were in the middle, and then we said we need more time. So I think last time we discussed why we should return value task over task, and I think the conclusion was it's okay, but it also probably doesn't do much.
Yeah, I think it's okay, and in particular in this case, I suspect we will actually be able to take advantage of it. Under the covers, we have a pool of Socket.AcceptAsync event args, and we can utilize those to be the backing store for the value task. So whether we do it in the initial implementation or not, I think it's both reasonable here that we would optimize it and not the 99.9% use cases. It's just to weight these. So the usability impact is not a huge deal.
Yeah, because they're weighted all the time, right?
So should the cancellation tokens be optional?
I thought last time we said they couldn't because of method overload issue.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem because if you don't have it, then the shorter signature would win because exact match always be something that was inferred from defaults.
Right, so they're functionally not optional. There's no point in making them optional because of the other overload.
Yeah, because you'd explicitly have to pass something.
Yes.
So we could make them, it's just there's no point. That's the conclusion.
Yeah.
And Steve, there's no weirdness with these overloads returning value task and the other ones returning task. Like
There
that discrepancy
is.
Okay.
It's we've talked about this in the past, and it's one of those gray areas. That the concern would be someone was using the return value in a way that works fine with task and is a no-no with value task, and they go and we have an analyzer that says, oh, you should really pass in your cancellation token here, and now they've changed their semantics because they were using the return value in an inappropriate way based on the overload that was called, and it doesn't show up anywhere in their code, especially if they're just dotting off of it, or they're using var, which is one of the reasons I don't like var. So it's an issue in the sort of weighing the balance. I think value task probably still makes sense, especially for accept, because it's pretty common for accept to return synchronously.
Yeah,
you've already got a connection waiting in your listening backlog, and so you accept and it's just right there, and so you avoid the task in that case. It's a judgment call.
And your analyzer should also help improve the health of the ecosystem around value task, right? So
I certainly hope so. If not, it's not doing its job. Which reminds me, I need to actually get that checked in. So thank you.
I look forward to it. Okay.
Right, looks good.
The screen
So then my other question is, so there is a bunch of other async methods on Socket task extensions. What about those?
We
So specifically,
we have other
There's
issues.
a separate issue, I think, covering some of them, but I don't remember exactly. I think Tomasz had opened up an issue around some of the UDP-focused APIs. I don't know if that plus this is everything, or if there's still a gap.
But there's no reason why we wouldn't add overloads with cancellation token for the others. It's just additional work, but there's nothing wrong with it, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I mean, we need to look at the individual methods to see if there's anything that's not actually cancelable. Like we had a discussion this morning actually about whether we should have a disconnect async. And I don't know if I don't know yes or no whether cancellation token makes sense on disconnect async. But we could consider on a case by case basis if there was a question.
Right. Right, that seems reasonable. Then what about the other ones? So I guess Socket, we don't do anything. We convince ourselves that cancel accept async is not cancelable.
Well,
I'm
that's how
assuming we
you
can
cancel
implement
the
it.
event args.
Oh, that's the new API in order to do the other thing? Or?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's a weird pattern, but it's following the existing cancel connect async.
Yeah, I'm just missing it, but what was this different from this one?
The middle word. Connect
Oh,
async.
sorry, I cannot see apparently. Okay, that makes
And then both the TCP client and TCP listener, I think those are just thin wrappers around. I think in general, all the methods just delegate to the underlying socket.
I see, so there's not much work once we have the socket one done.
Yep.
Right.
I do think it would be worth subsequently someone taking the action item to go through and make sure that we either have an issue or we open an issue covering all of the remaining socket methods so that we stop doing this piecemeal.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
Are you volunteering, Corey?
Yeah.
which is basically these guys. All right, so let me just paste this back in. Okay, let me tag Corey on this one because he was just volunteered. What's your GitHub thingy?
Scalable query.
Oh, that's right. But do you scale?
We'll see.
You can just start typing the person's name and GitHub will automatically fill in their alias.
Yeah, it turns out some names are not helpful. Like my name probably works, but if you say Jeff, Joe, Mike, Corey, there's too many that suggest an autocomplete.
You're number 4 on the list for me.
Maybe it's, I don't understand GitHub's algorithm.
It does it based on who's in the org, who's on the contributors list for the repo, and who's actively on the issue.
And what moon phase. And
I don't think that applies.
That gives you werewolf, Corey.
all right. What's context on this one? Steven, do you have context on this one?
Sure. So, sorry, I'm hearing a weird echo. Is there any way to fix that?
Yeah, I think I don't know. Like I don't think there is on my
Someone's got
end
a
any
mic
way
on.
of doing that.
All right, I'll try and talk through it. So on Socket, we expose the SetSocketOption method, but because of how things work, and there are the underlying values on Windows are different from the underlying values on Linux, are different from the underlying values on Mac OS. So we have to do a translation layer between the actual values that are specified and what we pass to the underlying OS. But that means that if you pass something that's not in our translation mapping, we fail. We say that's not valid, and there's no way through the public surface area for you to say, but I want to use XYZ option on Linux or ABC option on Mac OS, and kind of say, okay, if I'm running on Linux, set this, or if I'm running on Mac OS, set this. So this would basically be a way to skip our translation layer and just pass directly to the OS rather than you having to do the key invoke yourself. And you'd be responsible for knowing the right codes that for the OS that you're targeting. Basically, it's an escape hatch. If we don't provide the option, it doesn't prevent you from using something.
Would we provide a list of ones that we know about?
If we knew about it, we would encode it in our.
And then you call the other one.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's get raw socket option supposed to do if option value span isn't big enough? Throw?
Whatever the current one does, I guess.
Well, the current one allocates.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, I guess it would throw.
Well, the current one, you specify a length. So it will have some behavior if your length is not enough.
Okay.
When you said the existing one, what do you mean by existing one?
The comment that says
One
the
that's
existing API signature.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see it. So I didn't.
So does the size of the byte array or the bytes change over time? Like,
Depending on the option you pass in, the data returned can be different size.
but like, for example, when something changes in the OS, like, I install a new version of Windows, would it change the size?
I can't think offhand of any options that are like that.
Because I wonder,
theory,
should it be try?
Well, even if you
Instead of
try,
because it's not completely like if it's not a constant size, I think we said
Oh,
we would
well,
try.
there would still be backward compatibility, like binary compatibility with older sizes. Like I imagine there would be some sort of like a lot of the EX structs have size in them, things like that. So
The point is like, can I call this method and know that it's not gonna throw?
My concern, I hear what you're saying, my concern with the try is it may be, well, first, I'm with Corey, I can't think of any case where for a given option, the size of its value would change. Certainly between options, but for a given option, I can't think of any reason it would. My concern with the try is, when looking at it, I would actually think that it was talking about the specific option, and specifically because this is about, getting the value for a specific option on a particular OS. I could imagine people thinking the try meant, well, I'm trying to get the value for this number, and if the number doesn't exist, then don't worry about it. Maybe that's not the case, but that would be my concern. Like it wouldn't be clear what the one thing is the try was referring to.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So in the current one, is option length a thing that you have to give it the right answer for the option?
Yes.
So this option value dot length is you either have the right answer and it works, or you have the wrong answer and it gives you like whatever the unsupported.
Yeah.
Because like if you called like, I don't think that the address is an option, but if you called like get adder and it's like, well, I'm sorry, you moved from IPv4 to IPv6, the answer's bigger now. You told it like get adder, I have 4 bytes, and it's like nope.
Yeah, I think that there are the cases where you would use a try here would be, I can't really think of anything specifically around the byte buffer being too small. And it's, there we go.
Oh, great.
And this really is being added as a method that lets people, like they know specifically what platform they're on and they want to do something that we just don't support yet.
Right. But my point really is if the span length is effectively an input into the underlying thing and you have to get it right to get the right answer, then we don't need to try because there's no grow pattern.
Well, is the method throwing if the span is too large, or only when it's too small?
Not when it's.
I think only when it's too small, because I think the idea when
when it's too large, I think it would return the length.
Yeah, Jeremy. So you don't have to have exactly
Okay.
the right size.
Well, like a lot of Win32 stuff is you give it a size of thingy, and if you give it a thing it doesn't know about, it tells you like, I don't know what version of the future you're from, but like, I can't fill in your struct.
I mean, it's such a advanced API that it almost doesn't matter what we do here.
Yeah.
We're really just adding it so people don't have to p-invoke it themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I lost your screen. Is that something you're working on?
Yes, you should be back actually.
There's no red border around
The
it.
border's gone.
Oh, because the yeah, never mind. Hold on.
Our screen rebooted,
And of
because
course,
that's a thing screens can do now. Welcome to 2020. Yeah. Apparently today is just full of 2s and 0s.
so you should be seeing the screen now. Of course, I don't get it back in OBS.
So it actually had
Meaning YouTube can't see it.
Yeah, right
Correct.
now YouTube's the blurred out background of the bunch of happy people around a table.
Cool.
And it's not us.
No,
Man, this is frustrating.
we're
I
the
wish I had one
unhappy
back.
people around the table.
Yeah, I was gonna say he said happy people. You beat me to the joke. How am I supposed to maintain the status as class clown if I'm too slow on the punchlines?
Are you recording the wrong window?
I already know what I just did.
I think now we're projecting the recording from 3 seconds in the future. Score.
Okay, so this one works, but like, well, I guess I can close OBS. That should work. We'll see. All right. Back to where I was. So I guess we said this is fine.
Yeah, I mean, it seems just like if the other one is if option length is the maximum length it's allowed to be, and you give a too small answer, and it is already having a behavior, then I think it's just as hard to use as the existing one, and yep, sure.
which we were okay with shipping for that.
But what do you do with the bytes anyway? Like, aren't you usually basically copying it to a struct and then accessing it into?
Yeah, well, maybe it's a D word, maybe it's a struct.
Yeah, what the value is depends on the option. So you have to know like how to interpret the bytes.
Yeah. But my point is that even in the existing API, where you get a byte array and it allocates, like if you immediately go to, marshal pointer to structure or something, then that's not going to be
What you're going to do.
like any better when the size is different, right? So
Yep.
Very generally, what you're doing is, it's a major optimization to span a byte array, but it's
Actually, if you're using Quark, you're doing this quite a bit more than once per socket.
sure for specific options.
Yeah.
You're calling get or just set?
You're setting it.
Yeah, with Quark, you unset it and then set it every time you want to flush the socket. Yeah, I
Wouldn't
don't,
that make a very chatty API?
Yes.
Wouldn't that kill performance?
You are optimizing for packet size.
all right, done. Crispy. Somebody hungry or? It sounded like it.
So who here knows system drawing?
It's been a while.
That sounded like I have context on this.
As one of the things that we changed the guidance for in this version of the book, perhaps these static read-only should be lazy initialized get-only properties.
Well, there are existing static read-onlys.
Do we really want to make the CC Tor do more work?
Well, if they're initialized inline, then it's not the same as the static CTOR.
The other CC Tor. The pre-CC Tor.
I mean, they're only initialized if you actually use this type.
Yeah, but if you use any part of the type,
Well, no,
you're
it's,
probably not using all of the encoders.
Sure.
So it looks like these are just options.
yeah,
Set
new
for
new
encoder.
entries.
It comes down to how much we care about consistency with the existing
Yeah.
10 options.
I'm fine either way. I just brought it up for discussion.
I love the name of this guy.
Is this in Win? No, this is in.
System drawing.
For some reason, it's not being captured by source.net. Whatever.
Oh, because it's probably in a different repo, right? It might be in the WinForms repo now.
Or source.net maybe having one of the days where OOB packages don't get scanned. Or
Yeah, I have it here.
So I guess my question for this would be, what happens if you're on an older version of
Right.
GDI Plus that doesn't support these? I'm curious how these are used.
I mean, these literally are just magic strings, for lack of a better term. The encoder class literally just wraps a GUID. It's kind of like OID, but whatever. It's kind of like OID, but immutable.
Where does this type live, by the way?
System.drawing.common.
That's where encoder lives?
Oh, sorry.
So it's just a reference.
Wait.
Because
The
I can't find the
namespace
type.
here is system drawing imaging.
Oh, that might be why.
maybe
Okay.
more there.
System
Okay, yeah,
drawing,
okay.
imaging, encoder. Okay, now I can find the type. Okay, that makes more sense.
But yeah, it's literally,
Yeah, okay.
it's just a bunch of GUIDs.
So it's a strongly typed GUID.
Yep.
Which is pretty normal for GDI.
Well, Windows for that matter.
Yeah.
All right, so then
So
I don't
these
want
are
to even know
just-
where my CPU is going crazy.
These are just accelerators for those well-known IDs. So then presumably when you try and use one on a system that doesn't understand the magic answer, you get some sort of error that is documented from the places that take one of these things.
Well, I would imagine it would be the same as had you passed just a random like GUID.NuGUID in there,
Yeah.
which already has to have a defined behavior.
Right, yeah. I guess the real question is the encoder constructor validating that the ID is known?
No, it's
Or
literally
is-
just a GUID wrapper.
Is it whenever you pass it into something else?
It's just a GUID wrapper.
GDI is validating it.
Yeah.
Which leads me to question, why is it a class?
Legacy.
Because it was.
Because we defaulted to classes. I think that guideline might have been written by the person sitting to your left.
No.
No?
Value type.
Didn't you say that?
That what?
By default, use classes unless proven otherwise.
Oh. I don't think
Yeah, so it
that
basically
was ever.
it tells GDI how to interpret the act. So imagine that this is a parameter type, and there's a block of data that's passed in with it, which is the actual value. And this tells GDI how to interpret the byte buffer that's being passed in.
Are you still with us, Steve?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I got a weird
Yeah.
re-notification that the meeting had started. So, I think Teams is just being weird.
All right, so then,
I mean, this seems pretty straightforward.
I feel like I'm okay with it. Have we verified that GDI Plus supports these things?
well, that would be part of testing, right? That,
Okay.
I mean,
And what do we do, again, if you on OS that doesn't have these features?
Whatever GDI's behavior already is.
yeah, I mean, like we have in the past at some point dropped for supported versions of Windows, right? And then I think you just get platform not supported or, you know,
So you kind of have to check.
get lost
yeah.
error kind of thing, yeah.
This is documentation.
All right, so then one down again. Steven, I think you're up again because you're probably the closest person on this one.
Parallel for each.
This is fine. This class is just a grab bag of options, and the idea was you construct it and use the initialization syntax or properties to set the options. This is just asking to promote the most common one to a constructor parameter on a new constructor.
What does the existing constructor look like? Parallel options.
Why not just
I think we did
use-
this initially thinking like there'd be a whole bunch of other options. There ended up being maybe 3. And so we hadn't added constructors because we figured out we'll use this initialization pattern, but yeah, so whatever.
What about if you ever want to add another int property to this class in the future?
As with any other constructor that has an int, it would have a very specific meaning, and we could easily add the property, and then there'd be a question of adding another constructor if we wanted to. And if you ended up with multiple ints in your constructor, you'd need to know what they meant. But I also think it's unlikely we'll end up adding another property here.
Because what I was trying to figure out is if in practice people would end up using named parameters in order to differentiate the different ints in the constructor, and if so, why not just use the object initializer syntax?
Right. At that point, you would just use the initialization syntax. I mean, this request is really about saying new parallel options 8 instead of new parallel options open brace max degree parallelism equals 8.
So would it make sense to go even further and have a implicit cast from int to the options?
Oh, an implicit cast that allocated?
Well,
Because
yes.
That feels weird to me.
That seems scary. I mean, for a variety of reasons, never mind the allocation thing, just saying parallel options equals 8. Like, what the hell is 8?
That makes me think it's an enum, honestly.
Yeah, that seems a bit.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Too cute.
Too cute. Do not be cute with operator overload.
I don't even think it's cute.
I guess everyone has a different definition of cuteness.
Well, I mentioned that because Steve said we added this type. There are many, there are 3 options, but actually most, I understood most people just want an int.
It would be an easy way to let people just pass in 8s to all of our overloads without adding more overloads.
Yeah.
Or maybe a default way to say the max degree of parallelism is your logical processor count, which is probably the most common scenario.
I mean, that kind of, I would say at that point, you probably want to just change overloads of 4 each, right? Or whatever other common methods take parallel options today.
Like the thing is,
more...
we're only saving someone from writing like 20 characters by doing this.
I would agree with that. I mean, well, I think part of the problem is that you write for each loops in line, right? And you want to, like, logically, you want to, like, just because you make a parallel, you would like to have the for each or the for loops still look very close to what you would normally write.
Yeah.
So reducing characters there can just make it look more similar, right? That argument I buy a lot more than just I want to save some characters.
Yeah, but in that case, you can also just create one of these instances, you store it in the static somewhere, and you pass it in everywhere you need it.
And it'd be just like saying, S parallel width. It's S parallel options.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Like, you probably don't want... The only thing you may want to pass in every single time is the cancellation token, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there are three properties, if I remember correctly, there are three properties on here. There's the parallelism, there's the cancellation token, and there's the scheduler.
Right.
And it's sort of in order of usage. It's that order. So it's, the most usage is specifying the parallelism, the second most is specifying a token, and in distant third is specifying a scheduler.
Right. Yeah, so I think cancellation token is probably the only one where I could actually see us promoting it as an argument then for each ever if you care. Because that one seems to be, variable versus the other ones seem to be mostly invariant to what you're doing.
I mean, you could always just make the constructor take 2 parameters and make the cancellation token default. That way you just have the constructor there for anyone who needs it.
That's not horrible.
I mean,
Why not add the task scheduler as a parameter then too?
Yeah, because as Steven said, right, like there's like 1 in 100 cases where you may want to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you made the constructor where it took the parallelism, comma, a defaulted scheduler, and comma, a defaulted cancellation token, or whatever order we think makes sense, then that's you have the go build this constructor in addition to the create set call.
So we would basically say a null task scheduler would be the default, and that would be task scheduler.default.
Yeah.
So the only problem with that, I'm looking at the type so for better or worse, and probably worse, when you construct a default parallel options instance, like no parameters, obviously can't pass any today, scheduler defaults to default. But if you explicitly set the task scheduler property to null, then we will treat that null as meaning use the current scheduler rather than default.
So just leave off the scheduler parameter.
Yep.
So should we then add the optional default the optional cancellation token or not?
I mean, if it's common enough for people to want to specify it, we may as well make it convenient if we're already making this convenient, right?
How common is it? Because this is a blocking call, right? It doesn't return a task.
Right. It basically causes the loop to stop processing further iterations. And then throws.
Think of it like you have a UI-based application which is doing work on a background thread, CPU work on a background thread. You hit a cancel button. Like you want to
promote that.
I mean, I don't see anything wrong with having it. Just
so the only parameter. Given the task scheduler default versus null being current distinction, it seems weird that we can explain the int one in terms of the existing default constructor, but it feels weird. Like it feels weird to me, given that you didn't get to specify the value but it has a value and it's not null. Like,
but that's true regardless of what we do, right?
Yeah.
Even if we don't add a constructor, that's the behavior we currently have, right? So that seems.
But it feels a little different of like this is the default state versus like this is the state and you gave me an int and like I also made up some other things. It just feels a little wrong. I'm not saying like no. I'm just pointing out it feels a little wrong.
I mean, to me, like saying scheduler is rare, so you only ever set it as a property seems fair. So we don't have a constructor, and then I think it's also fair to say, yep, there is a default that is not null, but it's because it's a property, right? I think it would be weird if we had an overload that takes a scheduler. And then the one you called that doesn't have one, then it's not null. That would be weird, I think.
The only thing that I worry about is I feel like the concurrency level, you would probably want to create basically static, store it, and then use it all the time.
Right.
Cancellation token, you kind of pass different one every single time. So
you probably just pass null or the non token every time. But maybe you actually are passing one.
You can also just capture whatever token you're using in the body of your loop, which is what a lot of use ends up doing. Doesn't even, the downside to that.
You allocate.
That's basically what you end up doing.
The point I was trying to make, I would probably not use the cancellation token because the concurrency level, I would just have a static. Therefore, I don't know if it makes sense to. add it as a constructor parameter.
I think if it were up to me, I think I would either just leave, let sleeping dogs lie, or add just the constructor with the integer, but not go further than that.
Okay.
Works for me too.
I think since what we're really saying is you either like that you need to make the local or the static, or I guess instance field. I don't know that there's any reason for change, but if we want to add the int one, that's fine.
Yeah.
If only this thing was a struct.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Then we could have an implicit cast, and then you could add cancellation token. Because you can
Even if it's a
No
struct.
implicit cast.
Even if it was a struct, I still would object. Just
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love it.
As you know, Christoph, implicit casts confuse people. It's like you see that you're passing 8, and you're like, take me to this method. It's like one that takes a parallel options. You're like, no, I passed 8. I want
So
one that takes an int.
turning the scenario on its head, if the real answer is that people are trying to specify a max degree of parallelism and the newing up of parallel options is the only way for them to do it, should we actually just have an accelerator straight on parallel for each for the scenario and ignore changing the parallel options class itself?
You could do
add
that. It would
overloads?
be more than that overload.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There are
because
tons
isn't
of
there?
overloads.
There's also parallel 4, where just 8 is going to be confusing in relation to the length and beginning. And
But I
so-
guess what I was getting at, if there's like 1 or 2 overloads that we could add to parallel.for each that would get 90% of the way there, that seems more reasonable than making a change to parallel options. Because it would just make the overall call site more useful to
I don't
people.
even know if this was the example here was written using for each, but
Yeah.
I don't know that that's actually the predominant
Okay.
case.
I would actually imagine that 4 is more predominant,
Okay.
because like if you're doing sum over an array, you're not going to for each over the entire array, because that's incredibly inefficient. You're
Right.
going to allocate stack allocate an array that's 8 wide, because that's how many cores you have. You're
Yeah.
going to segment the array, compute so that you don't have to do any kind of interlocked operations, and then you'll just do a quick for over the final 8 results to compute the final sum.
Sure.
I'm kind of with Jeremy. I don't know if there's a huge amount of value in adding this. I'd be happy if we just kept things the same.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I mean, my
Thank you,
caliber is
but no thank
low. I mean, if you don't want to do it, then we can also reject it.
I personally, having used Parallel for a number of times and not liking the default behavior of I scale indefinitely according to the task scheduler, I would enjoy having an overload that allowed me to specify trivially the max parallelism.
An overload of what? The parallel
The
options
parallel
constructor?
options.
Okay.
Because that just applies to everything. We don't have to consider about the 20 overloads of 4 and 4 each that there are.
I still don't.
It's
What
not
do you
part of
mean by trivially? You saying this constructor is trivially specifying it or not?
Yeah, just calling parallel options. Because
Do you new it up in line when you call for each?
in most
Or
of the
you store it
cases
in
I've
the
used it, I've just done
that's a
it in
typical
line.
use.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah,
basically this here.
Then I am a bit confused. You basically are saying you don't want the implicit cast because it allocates. Well, this allocates too. And then you want
The allocation is a minor reason. For the most part, the work you're doing here, like the allocation doesn't matter. After all, this is spinning up
it's
a whole bunch
done,
of
okay.
tasks. It's keeping working. It's a thread pool. Like you're doing. If you're using this, you're doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
My initial that allocates was sort of a separate thing.
Okay.
The main concern with the implicit cast is all right, imagine that first parallel 4 line, and it says 0, 108.
Yes. And
What?
so
What does that mean?
Yeah.
The separate concern is
So
if I have parallel options equals 8, it's very confusing. What does that mean? There's no concept of a number going to an options.
So let's one by one. So you're saying at the call site there's gonna be a bunch of integers and it's confusing what they are.
Yes.
Well, don't we have this problem all over the place? This is a problem with source code, correct? If you really want to make it explicit what it means, some people use call by name Otherwise, yeah, call sites sometimes are not very transparent what's going on. There are a bunch of, integers passed.
Yeah, but
and
in this
numbers.
case, there's no need for it.
Yeah.
There's no need for the confusion.
It's like we add one constructor, or we update 40 methods.
So look, there's no need for confusion. It's still confusing. You just created parallel options and you passed 8. I have no idea what the 8 means.
Well, I thought it was an enum value at first, so
Yeah.
whatever.
So there's still confusion. I don't know if it really helps.
Then the existing thing is the best. There's no ambiguity with new parallel options. Max degree of parallelism equals 8.
Yeah, we should just keep it. It's seriously not, like, this API is not allowing any scenarios that can't already exist even on a single line of code.
I mean, I'm okay with the API as it's proposed because, as Tanner said, if you write it a lot, I can see it being slightly better.
And if you want to avoid the ambiguity, max degree of parallelism : space 8.
Sure, but then you save
four
literally.
characters.
That's
It's
the
not
author
about
avoiding
saving
ambiguity instead of the
characters
reader
necessarily.
avoiding ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're saving 2 characters.
So anyway, my
Seems
stance is,
minor.
I buy the argument. This is kind of very verbose, and it would be nice if I could just pass the parallelism. But then I'm saying, we either go all the way out, and I realize many people don't like it. And if we don't go all the way out, then I don't know how much it improves. It's still ambiguous. It saves you 4 characters.
Constructors are the default way to initialize objects, and initializer lists are additional sugar on top of that. And so every time I come across an instance where the constructor does nothing, and then I have to go and call initializers, it bugs me.
But it's an options class. That's the intent of it.
I would
It's a
agree that we
property
should
value.
have the constructor if we could do it for all the parameters, but given that we can't encode the default behavior of the task scheduler, I think we should just leave it as it is.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Okay.
Yep.
Just no implicit conversions. I don't like that.
No, we can't have an
No,
implicit
This is just a very old create set call. Yeah.
Get that. What's wrong with that?
It's all maps approved. Oh, first.
I'm confused what my API tool will do after this. I don't think approving it and then not approving it is handled very well, but we'll see.
It's a good trust case. For
After
it.
more discussion, it seems we prefer the current state because it less All right. Sequence reader of T. Try read overloads to read a specified number of elements. Didn't we look at this before? This looks familiar.
So this API very much confused me when it first came through, because on most buffer read APIs, the span that you pass in is the maximum buffer that you're able to read, and then the API returns the number of elements that it actually populated into the buffer. These APIs turn that pattern on its head. These APIs say, you must fill the entire span with data, otherwise fail.
But they're not filling a span. They're producing a span.
They're related to, they're related to other APIs that are being used in that way. But
So these are just
anyway.
saying slice the underlying store.
yeah. So if you can't read 30 bytes, for instance, then it won't out anything at all. TryRead will return false, I believe.
I see. And there is this subtle hint with the count being passed in.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if we think that this is valuable, I think it should be TryRead exact.
Yeah.
Because usually a count is somewhere in the minimum or maximum range, and this one is both.
Yeah.
But because I feel like, TryRead 7, like that's allowed to return 5, right?
Yeah, Jeremy kind of commented on what I was hitting at. Like we need to differentiate whether this API is TryRead exact or TryRead up to, because most of the other APIs on SequenceReader are exact, not up to.
And why do we, like, what's the scenario for this? Like, why do we want exact number of bytes?
Because it's mainly used for things like networking protocols, where I need to be able to read a 64-bit integer off the wire. I need to read exactly 8 bytes in order to have meaningful data.
Because otherwise you have to do the dance of it. You read 4, you read another 4, then you stitch it together, and then you actually can do something useful with it.
So if the data is in 2 different buffers, it will allocate?
Is there a comment in
I
here?
think that's.
I think it might just
I feel like
return
I've seen
false.
this before. And
We talked about that before. Was that this or something else?
I don't know. I know we have talked about it before, and it's in a thing that makes me not happy with understanding what memory lifetimes of things are.
Well, they are safe unless you say otherwise. So I assume this would allocate a small array, copy the data, and give you a span over the array, which you don't care about the lifetime.
But I think if it fits in one segment, it's going to give you a span from that one segment, and then it can refill it later after you've called consume. Yeah. So sometimes you own the memory and can't do anything about it, and sometimes you don't own it and shouldn't do anything about it.
Well, I think the contract would be
Yes,
that it has the same lifetime of the span being
Yeah.
parsed, and if we give you an array, you can't tell, you have to treat it as if it was from the original memory.
So it looks like the behavior is if it has that many bytes available, like looking at Fowler's comment, if it has that many bytes available, it will return a slice of a single span if it's able to. Otherwise, it will allocate a new array by concatenating 2 spans together, and then out that to you. So this is an allocating API potentially. At least based on Fowler's comments.
So we do it because we believe that stitching, like passing in buffers and stitching is not.
There's
Oh, we
already
don't
an
want to
API
pass
to
in
do
buffers
that.
because in case the data is already there. Yeah, I
Yes.
understand now.
But the thing is, this API will return true if the data is already there, but in multiple discontiguous buffers. The problem is, in that scenario, it would have been cheaper for you to provide your own buffer for it to fill. And with this API, it's now saying, like, I'm going to do the expensive work for you. The expensive work you were trying to avoid.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that if the count is usually very small, you know, the optimization that you said where you pass in your own buffer probably would be useful. But if it's very large, then it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's kind of the reverse. You're expected to have fairly large segments in your sequence. So the idea that this would allocate is for like very rare scenarios where you're crossing that boundary, and the larger thing you're trying to pull out, the more likely you are to be crossing that boundary.
Yeah. Well, the very particular scenario listed here is where the length isn't known at compile time. It's only known at runtime.
And then as when you get big enough that you're LOH, that means the GC is not going to reclaim it. If you asked for 8 and it happened to segment, then you're going to get a Gen 0 pickup on your thing if you read the data and then discarded it. So
there is a variant
so
of this.
The bigger the number you're asking for, the less you want to use this, but the more you want to use this because it makes your work easier. So it does feel that this is a performance trap for the type that you're using because you think that your performance is sensitive.
Yeah, this is meant to be a high performance API, and like Jeremy said, you can't reason about the performance of it. I think this has to go back through design.
So the alternative would be you pass your small stack allocated. Let's say you want to get an int. You want to get 4 bytes.
Yeah.
You would prefer the value to be from the actual buffer, but you pass a separate buffer as well.
Yeah, you pass in a temp span. And if it, I mean, I don't know that I like that for a public signature, but if it was, you know, some signature that you gave it a span of temp, and then it will give you back either I filled temp because I had to, or I gave you a slice. So it will copy when it needs to, but that would have been the exact same work that you had to do.
Yeah. So an alternative proposal could be, for instance, TryRead contiguous, where it only returns true if it's able to give you a span from the underlying sequence reader, Otherwise, it returns false. And at that point, you either now have an option of telling it, fine, allocate and give the data to me, or let me pass in a buffer and then you can fill it.
If we went all the way and kind of optimized the API as much as we can, I think this is much better even than just every time asking the user to stack allocate and pass in. And then, as you said, most of the time, the stack allocation or the or reserving the space on the stack is completely useless.
And you could have a greater helper method for that as well.
It is a little, because you do have two conditions that you're going to return false. One is I don't have that much data, and the other is I don't have that much data in this span.
Yeah.
But presumably you can ask it how much total data is remaining, so you can disambiguate them yourself.
Well, the second overload should never allocate, ever.
Right.
Because it will give you back what remains if it's available. Otherwise, it should return false.
It'll give you back what? No, is it?
Read-only sequence is a struct.
No. But if you ask TryRead 75, presumably false means there's less than 75 total bytes.
Yes.
And true means here's the sequence over the.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not. It'll give you what's left.
No, it'll if there are 75 or more bytes, it will return an appropriately sliced sequence.
Right.
Allocation free.
So yeah. So that TryRead is.
I take that back. It's not allocation free. I lied.
So
the sequence is a value type.
But it's a chained value type.
It doesn't allocate for slicing. You get two segments, and then where you start.
Yes, you're right. Okay.
Like it'll do work to figure out the sequence position. It'll call slice. It'll out the slice, and then it'll advance itself.
So it'll wrap the original buffer without making a copy of the original buffer. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So the second one seems fine. The first one, seems wrong.
Yeah. From the second one, you could say, "Are you single segment? If so, just give me the span." But the caller could do that.
I mean, if we added a TryRead contiguous that produced the span, presumably the implementation would do better than doing the sequence slice followed by asking. Like it would start with current segment or current span and then ask the question. But
yeah. So what was I think one of you suggested the idea where we pass in the span, right, and then, but that still means we would have to allocate it. So it just means we're better than allocating, right?
Well, so if we did the version that took the number you want, the temporary, if it needed to move beyond boundaries, and then it told you here's what the answer is, then you as the caller would pre-allocate, and then you would use the same one over and over again on subsequent calls.
No. Well, that's one, but that's not what Levi was saying. What Levi was saying, we have an API that only gives you the value if it has it in contiguous buffer. If it doesn't, you have a fallback path, code path, where you call this API, where you copy into your own stack allocated memory.
Right.
But at no point is an allocation ever made.
Right. So we were talking about two different things.
Yeah.
But why is that better?
It's better because the first one, the API that I give you a buffer if I have it, otherwise I return false. It's the most efficient API we can have.
But why is that better from, let's say, taking a ref span?
Yes.
Where you pass in your stack allocated span, and then if it's a contiguous buffer, it just overrides that with basically
because in the event that you only wanted to do the give me the one shot, otherwise I'm going to do something completely different, you didn't have to stack allocate just to pass the length check. Or
sure, but I mean that's predicated on the fact that in your else you don't always allocate somehow and then pass in some baby, right?
But you may have the if you can give me the one shot in a span, I want to do that. Else I'm going to call the sequence one and then walk over the spans myself.
Sure. But is that very likely?
You're using a very complicated type with very complicated I want you never to allocate anything semantics.
Yeah.
So yes.
So another comment in this thread is that there is an existing TryRead2 method that outs the span, and its behavior is it allocates an array.
Yeah, and I think that we were upset about that at the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, but which one is that? TryRead2 that?
SequenceReader.try. Sorry.
So TryRead 2 is
SequenceReader.TryRead2.
is count as the maximum, and this one is count as the exact.
It reads to a delimiter. It reads to, for instance, a comma, and then it returns everything up to but not including that.
Okay.
Or optionally, you can include it if you pass a
Sure.
Boolean true. But it outs a read-only span, and that read-only span, if it's from a discontiguous buffer, will be a byte array, basically. Just news of an array right on the spot.
Also, I wonder if we made the parameter ref, whether there are implications for like code gen. Because users would stack allocate a span, pass by ref to this method.
Yeah.
Now, when you get it back, it may be either the stack allocated span or some internal span in the buffer. And I wonder whether our JIT is not super confused at that point. What is supposed to be doing?
Well,
with
the stack unwind doesn't. It'll never look at the span to figure out how to do the stack unwind from the stack.
Yeah, it just does a minus.
It saved the stack size at the beginning of the function. It says pop to there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's worth just measuring.
Yeah.
I wonder. Maybe their by ref, so by ref is not as bad as I initially thought. Maybe it would solve the problem. But I think I would measure, because this API will literally want optimize as much as we can.
I mean, what's funny about it, because this is a ref struct, you can't stack alloc. You can't use the span stack alloc and then pass that by ref. You have to use the unsafe create it from the pointer, because the compiler would be like, but SequenceReader could totally have saved your stack alloc span. It's like, yes, it could have, but it's not going to.
Oh, really?
What's confusing me...
You can't pass a stack alloc span into as a writable, or actually even as a read-only span, into or as a method or instance argument on a ref struct.
Yeah.
Really?
You have to go through complicated, turn it into a pointer first.
Oh, okay, well then, yes, that is
Terrible.
terrible.
So even if we took the writable span and then outed here's what the right answer was, but
one of the things that's confusing me is this issue links to the issue for TryPeek, and then within that issue there's a comment saying this is not an appropriate method for reading a large range of data, but the very particular scenario given here is potentially reading a large range of data. So there's a mismatch here somewhere.
All right, I now totally agree. The first overload needs to be changed. I mean, there are several options we could go to, either by ref or the solution that Levi was saying, 2 different APIs.
Yeah.
But the one as designed right now is really not the right one.
Yeah.
I think TryRead contiguous, or whatever we want to call this ambiguator on it for the span one, would be okay, and then TryRead outing the sequence, because that's essentially that's slice, unless it would be out of bounds.
Yeah.
Well, it's slice in advance, unless it would be out of bounds.
Also, I assume that most people would not use this API directly, correct? They would use something like UTF-8 reader. Do we have UTF-8? We don't. We
Well, there's a proposal to have UTF-8 reader work over a sequence reader or byte.
Yeah, okay, there's a proposal. But that's what I assumed, that you would pass it, and this is very low-level API that readers would use. Otherwise, the code to use it is so wacky.
Well, it gets a bit hectic there, because the UTF-8 sequence reader or whatever would need to start going into future buffers, because if you're parsing a double, for instance, you can't just assume that, oh, I got 20 bytes, let me stop parsing. The 21st byte might be a digit.
Yeah.
So at that point, there's potentially a copy involved.
Yeah, but after 15, even Tanner's math won't be computing semantic results anymore.
Yes, it does. You have to consider up to 768 digits for the longest representable double for it to correctly round trip and parse to the exact result.
Oh, I'm only thinking of time span, where I only need fractional seconds, because past that we're below our tick count.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know that I got the number 15 from somewhere.
Approve the read-only sequence one and then send read-only span back to the designer?
Yeah. And so then we also rename it to TryRead exact, correct?
Like, I think it's good to have the word. I mean, we could make the parameter name be exact count.
Yeah.
But I do feel that
Well, for
that
this,
most people, I feel that my instinct, if I look at this, is try read count as a maximum.
Yeah.
no, but for the span, it makes sense exact. For the sequence, it doesn't.
It returns a sliced sequence.
No, but the point is that it never fails. Like we said, the first overload, it could fail if it doesn't have enough data.
The second one cannot have enough data.
It returns false because there's no other condition. There's no other error condition. The first one has 2 error conditions. The second one only has 1.
Yeah, I guess it's just does someone find out by reading the documentation or by intuitively understanding what the method does that TryRead 6 will never return 5?
Yeah, I like TryRead exact for that reason.
So that's the thing I don't understand. What do you mean by like only one
Because
error
the
condition?
first one, so you passed 6
Right.
to the count parameter. What do you think the method will do? You said to read 6.
Most other read methods like stream.read read up to 6.
Yeah.
It's a
Returning
maximum.
less data is okay.
Yeah. I got burned by this in SequenceReader a few weeks ago.
Because you stream.read, you say, I'm willing, read up to 100, and it says I read 3. And
So
you're like,
do we put exact in the method name or in the parameter name?
I would say the
put it
method
as
name.
yeah, I think it's better in the method name.
It's fine.
Because you could also have a method called TryReadUpTo, for instance, and that would say, oh, you pass in 30, I'm going to return potentially less than 30, but I'll return 30 if I can. And then you would do stitching yourself.
All right, then let's do this.
Yeah, really just because stream read is read up to, and this one is give this, like, the produced value will always have length equal to the count that you gave it. And so it's different. It's what most people think stream.read does. A lot of people write the code of as soon as read returns a number other than the size you asked for, that obviously that meant into file. And then they get sad when they use SSL stream.
All right. Whee.
Making progress.
Another one.
Yep.
So this is just
Same thing.
read, but without advancing.
Yeah.
Don't we already have like a gazillion ways to do that?
This is interesting because it's a peek with a skip an account. I've never really seen that before.
Yeah, it's a little weird. But
Oh,
I
and we
think
have tried.
similarly, we're going to say no to the span one. And like try copy too seems fine. The skip's weird, and I don't know if it advanced the reader or not.
So
Yeah, why wouldn't you just slice the reader before calling copy to? Like, we don't have try copy to skip for span of t.copy to. You just expect you to slice it first.
Maybe because the reader doesn't slice.
You were saying, Tanner?
I was going to ask if I forgot now.
There's an advanced method on SequenceReader, which mutates the existing SequenceReader because it's a mutable rough struct.
Yeah.
So,
But you could do try copy too with even if TryPeek doesn't get the skip, you TryPeek a count and then slice, and yeah, it's a little less
But
efficient than it could be.
Is the skip applied before you copy or after?
presumably before,
It's presumably how many bytes.
Why
is skip?
did you presume that?
because otherwise you would slice the destination before passing it in.
Well, you would slice the destination before
If you wanted to start writing 5 bytes in, you would just slice your destination span by 5 before passing it as the destination span.
No. I think one interpretation of the skip is it copies to my span and then advances, basically.
But because he grouped it with all these TryPeeks, I think it's non-advancing. I think it's TryPeek into a destination span.
I mean, if you read the title, right, that's kind of what he's trying to do, right? Read a specified number of elements from any position, which kind of implies here.
I guess the main benefit of the skip is that the span returned isn't too big. Do we ever need to allocate for the span that we return?
Well, if this is similar to the TryRead that we had just talked about, then span would allocate.
In which case, the skip avoids a too large allocation when you're peaking.
Well, skip really tells you, because you might need to go into a different chunk, skip will help you identify which chunk you need to go into.
I bet that the reason for the skip is that you peaked before, you did something with the data, but because you peaked, not read, it didn't advance. So now you're doing another peak.
Now you're peeking at the thing after
you
the thing
basically
that you
want to
peeked at.
advance the previous thing that you already had.
Yeah,
But you're still not committed to reading it yet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you should just be able to slice the sequence reader. Like if this would make sense and follow every other pattern we had in the framework and through buffers. If we had sequence reader dot slice skip dot copy to count destination.
So I think if you're reading very small values, slice will be expensive on sequence reader.
Sequence reader is, as far as I can tell, a very large mutable rough struct. So yes, having slice return a new instance will be expensive.
Yeah.
But if you, and then I guess it depends on how big your skip is, because if you did the so if we had TryPeek count, which is again possibly what they want is exact here, and it gave you the sequence, and then you wanted to skip something, you can just now you have the sequence instead of the sequence reader, and now you can slice that. But if you're doing this a lot, then you're returning a complicated thing to get a simple thing.
Yeah.
And but again, I think we're gonna do the same. Presumably, we want this never to be allocating in the span version, so we're gonna punt that one back as figure out how to deal with the fact that you want this only to work on a contiguous thing and describe the rest of your behaviors, and then. I mean, TryPeek with skip and count again. I can understand how it makes sense.
This was previously approved on September 10th,
and then we unapproved it.
I don't know because during the copy, all of the labels got messed up, and the history behind assigning labels got deleted.
What? That shouldn't be the case.
There's a comment from September 10th, basically saying we approved it.
Maybe it's already checked in. Maybe it's already shipped.
But do you see that?
Just look for a comment. The first comment dated September 10th, edited by you, in fact.
Oh, that was one where I wasn't here, so that's why. Because I don't remember seeing that API.
But it looks like potentially, I know that when we moved issues from core effects to runtime, the history behind what labels got assigned when got deleted during the move. So that might be confusing us here. I don't know why it's marked ready for review right now.
I don't think it is even, right? It is. Yeah, you're right. There's no history for label changes.
Not anywhere in runtime, not for issues ever moved.
Because probably they got lost in the transfer. Yeah. So then I have no idea.
We could always go watch the video on video.
We could, but that would not be time efficient right now. Well, I don't know. How do people feel about it? Should we just defer this, or should we make a decision now?
Looks like we already approved it.
But we should talk to David because I think the API would be better for what I understand its use if we avoided this implicit allocation.
Yeah.
I can imagine how the implicit allocation is reasonable if we think the API would be called by, directly by lots of developers, but I feel like it's already so complicated that it's just a low-level API for us to use in readers.
But we wouldn't use it though because it has a potential for allocation. We would try to work around it as much as we possibly can.
Exactly.
So it seems to me when it was approved, we unapproved it because of discussion.
Okay.
Because basically it was approved and then there was a lot of discussion about allocation, as we can imagine. Then I apparently, which I also do not remember at all, ran a tool over all of CoreFX and ASP.NET to figure out how many of the APIs we have that return spans that actually allocate.
Yes.
The conclusion was virtually none of them do. Then Steven said, what about things like toArray that are called by the implementation? Then I said, that's unfortunate. So I don't think we made a decision. And if we made one, we, I think, changed our mind. So I think this is still up in the air. And it's good to see that we have the same concerns back there.
Yeah.
So
We're consistent.
we're consistent with the way we deal with it. So, what's the ruling? Go back and say, give me an API that doesn't allocate or makes it in such a way that it's predictable?
I mean, I think that we would say this for the TryPeek outing the span. We would say the same thing as we just did for TryRead, which is, come up with a. We don't want the allocating version of this. Come up with a name that makes it clear that it's not allocating and what you're supposed to do to deal with that, etc.
Yeah.
And then for the TryPeek one, do we already have a TryPeek and they're just adding an overload?
So I'm still struggling with the first sentence.
We have TryPeek of the next element, not the next sequence of elements.
So okay, so we don't have a count, and we don't have a skip and a count. And, okay.
So repeat what you said about the outing the span. You're saying
so the two that are outing spans.
Yes.
We're saying this is pumped back to the author for the same as we did for TryRead.
Yeah.
But we don't like that they're sometimes allocating. They're kind of a performance trap. Then the try copy 2 is weird. I don't know that we really talked about that one. So then we can. Okay, so we do have an existing try copy 2, and what they're wanting to do now is add the skip, but they've violated the parameter order for overloads.
Right.
But because it's not actually checked in yet, we can change whatever we need to.
Oh, I see the try copy 2 I see on APIs.NET.
The first one, yeah.
Yeah.
The one that just takes a span destination, which makes sense.
Right, and I'm looking to see if it's advancing or.
So for the try count,
it does not advance the reader. Okay.
Yeah.
So for try copy 2, I think we would put skip as the second parameter because it's overloading an existing method.
Well, hold on. Let's first talk about the TryPeek one. You would just swap skip and count, I suppose, right? Because they don't align anymore.
Oh, you want to talk about the things doing sequences instead of the
yeah, because that was logically the other one.
So, I mean, looking at what they want here, my instinct would be that what they want is TryPeek, count, out value, skip defaulted to 0, but maybe there's a reason they don't want to default here.
I mean, yeah, my concern is just that now the int is like it's changing positions between two calls.
Right.
But I can also see why you want skip before you pass in the count, because it kind of makes more sense this way. But maybe we just don't have the second one. We just say if you don't want to skip, just pass in 0, because then it's very clear what you're doing without even defaulting it. I mean, similar to how we don't have overloads that don't allow you, that don't specify the start index. You have to say even if it's 0, right?
Yeah, definitely the 2 there because there's an int in the same position, but it changes meanings.
Yeah.
That's a bad overload set. So either skip would need to move to the end, or skip would need to move. It would need to be count skip, which I think is weird, or it would need to be count with skip defaulted, so it's at the end.
Yeah, at which point I would probably just delete the second overload. and then just have only skip count value because it seems easier.
So why can't we have the slice thing that Levi was talking about?
On SequenceReader?
So SequenceReader is a mutable ref struct. We could actually make it a regular struct because it doesn't have any fields that are ref struct, whatever. It has quite a few fields inside of it. The size of the struct is probably going to be on the order of 3 dozen bytes or so. So calling slice and returning a new struct would involve a copy of 36 bytes-ish. And then you would call TryPeek on that. Like, in my mind, that's not the end of the world because struct copies are not all that expensive.
Yeah.
No, if you read an int, you want to read 4 bytes.
But you wouldn't call these methods,
Of
though, to
course
do
you would.
that.
For
You
example,
wouldn't call a method that has skip. You would just call a method that takes count directly and avoid the overhead of calculating the skip entirely.
Well, it depends on how much work you've already done, and that you know that you're trying to now read an int that's 86 bytes in from where the reader's currently pointed.
What's the scenario for that?
I don't know.
You
You've got
read-
some weird complicated
you're
header
reading
processing, and you're not sure if you're done with the header yet.
You're reading the first line of
Yeah.
HTTP response, and
Yeah.
you're basically reading, token by token, and they ask.
But the entire point of having a struct is that they're copy by value. Like if you need a pointer back to the beginning of the header line, for instance, you have your sequence reader that points there, and then as you're progressing, you have a new sequence reader that just says, here, advance, advance, advance. And now you just have 2 sequence readers on the stack. Eventually, you just pop one of them off. Like that's how value types
I
work.
think we are speculating. I remember vaguely how this type is used, and I know that it was like it's optimizing a lot of code paths down to the metal. We should just measure, design, point this issue with allocation to David, and we're not gonna close it in this room. That's my point.
No.
Right. So apparently now we're saying TryPeek is hard because they want a skip parameter.
Well, what they really should take in then, if you want to minimize the amount of work being done, is to take in a sequence position, not an int skip, because presumably you already know exactly where you have to skip to, and having a sequence position avoids you having to go, having to do that linear walk to where the next jump is.
As I said, I believe this is used in so optimized code paths that sequence position is too large. It has longs.
That's
just like
that doesn't bode well for the design of the type at large, though.
Well, that might be true, but that's
What's
also
wrong with
not
long?
something.
I mean, it's not just long. It's sequence position has actually 2 longs.
It's an int and an object under the covers.
So I think it's a long in an object.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
sure, long and object.
Yeah, but on
No, int and object.
Oh, okay.
at least on Linux, that's going to be passed and registered for both of them. So I mean, that's not the end of the world.
It's
Spans
not-
also.
It's not just passing. It's then how do you interpret those 2 values? You basically the object is to skip to a linked list node, and then the int is offset.
It's an
So
offset
like
node, yeah.
it's so much more expensive than just if I want to read 4 bytes, but not the first 4, the second 4 in a span.
Because it's a box and you have to unbox.
The object.
Mhm.
I think it actually maybe I now don't remember. It probably is not a box. It's just a cast. Still, you're following a linked list, and
And then for try copy 2, if we want to talk about the last thing on the list that we haven't yet sent back to the author, because we have an existing try copy 2 that writes to the destination, which is documented as not advancing, which is why it's logically grouped here with the peak. The skip, I think, our normal rules would say that the skip needs to be the second parameter,
Normally, yeah.
but it's not the same type, so we're a little fungible on that point. It's
Normally,
not changing the
yeah.
semantic of the thing in position 0.
Normally we say destinations go at the end though as well.
Yeah.
Well, we say sources are the first parameters, destinations are the second parameters, and then other things are the other parameters.
Yeah. Well, here source is this, destination is a span, and the offset into the source is skip.
Yes, so skip is sort of related to source because it's modifying
Yeah.
source instead of
So
modifying
I don't
how.
actually mind this parameter order, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't mind it either. Like, I mean, different overload, I think, is fine if parameters are not in the exact same position because you also had to take other different arguments, right? That seems reasonable. Within the same overload group, that's shitty. So, are we okay with the semantics though?
The try copy 2 with a skip? I think at this point we would actually punt it because it's going to be, if the answer for TryPeek is it uses sequence position instead of a skip count, then we would want the same thing for try copy 2. So it's logically okay, but we don't want to add it now if the TryPeek is going to change significantly.
I also want to know what it would look like for someone like ASP.NET or Kestrel to actually consume these APIs. Because these APIs that we just talked about, I don't see us using from within UTF-8 SequenceReader.
No, I think they are mostly motivated by what ASP.NET is doing.
Yeah, but I want to know. I want to know if Kestrel would also write their own extension methods on top of these, because even these wouldn't be high performance enough for what they need.
All right, then let me just put this back to API needs work and paste the comments. All right, so this is this one.
For some reason I thought this was approved. Let's see here.
Might have been unapproved. We don't see anything approved in it.
Could you scroll to show the proposed?
I mean, that seems pretty straightforward if you ask me.
Yeah.
The thing is, we're not gonna do any validation, or are we?
I mean, like it's like this is the implementation, right? It literally just calls the existing APIs into the class.
Maybe I.
So that seems. Yeah, I agree. You don't want to specify the T twice, right?
Yeah.
This seems
reasonable.
Yeah, it's the same thing that we have for many other cases.
Yeah. I know I've wanted this forever as well. Here, I'll thumbs up it as well.
Okay, somebody says like, okay.
So elsewhere, we have said we don't want to constrain to where T delegate because it breaks existing generic code paths that are wanting to use things. Basically, you can't call this unless so if you're in an already generic context, you can't call this unless your own T is constrained to generic.
I'm not too worried about that, because if you find yourself in that situation, call the existing overloads.
Yeah, but it's still different from every other method in the framework, including some other new ones where we've just said we're not going to do it because of generic contexts. The where T is delegate doesn't buy much.
Sure.
Weird.
So it seems, generally speaking, the conversation between Levi, Jeremy, and Jan says like this is fine. So it seems there was some concerns about ambiguity, which Jeremy discussed with Jan. Jan said, I don't know what I was thinking. Doesn't seem to be any. And yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about like technical aspects of the implementation, if there could be hidden pitfalls.
I mean,
and the answer was no.
The only thing I can see is maybe we need some other overloads, but I mean, it seems also not problematic to add these two and then add it in other places depending on feedback, right?
So per Tanner's suggestion, remove the delegate constraint. I would be fine with that.
And what does it bias? Sorry.
That's why it looks like something that I would have written and something I thought that I wrote, because I wrote it, but the edit history is lost because.
Did you wish to repeat?
Yeah, Basically, where TDelegate is a new C# constraint that allows you. Yeah, it's new. It wasn't allowed up until 8.0.
Capital D delegate of the. Okay.
It came in at the same time as enum.
It's not a new constraint, it's a recent constraint. The new constraint is old.
Because I thought that there was a little D delegate that was a reserved word and a big D delegate. Of,
That's $5 for the dead jokes right there.
The big D delegate wasn't allowed until enum was allowed, which was 7.3 or 8.0.
Yeah.
But anyways, it basically forces the constraint to be a delegate type. The issue is that because of the way generic constraints work, if you're already in a generic context, your own T must also be constrained to delegate for you to then call this method. And nowhere else in the framework, partially because it's new, uses the where TDelegate constraint because of that.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
we've said we can't change existing ones over to it, and it doesn't actually buy that much.
Yeah, the counter argument for that is if you find yourself in that situation, you could always just call the original overload and then cast.
hold on. Why can't we change the existing ones? Because if we at runtime fail anyway, then that seems fine.
Because because everyone who has existing code that compiles and works then has to go change their own constraints to also be where TDelegate.
It's like using adding const to a function in C after the fact.
No, I get it, but like I'm saying, like it's like your code clearly adheres to the constraint.
It's still a source breaking change.
The compiler
I get that,
doesn't
but
know
like
that.
I mean, you like if you wouldn't do it, if you actually pass in T that is not a delegate, clearly you wouldn't have worked, right? So yes, it's a source breaking change, but in the same way
you could have
that
an unconstrained generic where you have multiple paths depending on what the T is, one of which is to use a delegate.
You can have a logically
So
constrained but not
I
compiled.
think it's a real issue. My question would be how often or if ever it will be
also can't
in
you cast it
practice.
away?
No, you
can't cast
can't
it away.
cast. There's no way to satisfy a compiled or a generic constraint via the compiler.
Yeah, the only way around it would be to just call the existing overload, which is what people are already doing today.
Yeah.
And
So since this is a new method, it's not a breaking change. Adding the constraint on existing things is a source breaking change.
Right.
But as a new method, we could
But-
say you want to use the new thing and
But
be
in
correct.
practice, do we believe there's like any significant amount of code where T is a delegate and it's unconstrained and it just now I want to call this method from this other method? I mean, that's is it a theoretical issue or we should actually worry about
It would be nicer for a developer audience if, like Tanner suggested, we just allow it to work in a wider variety of situations.
Yeah.
You could just drop it into existing code paths.
To me, the main advantage of having the constraint it self-documents the API a bit better.
I agree, but also I would say if you're on MethodInfo.CreateDelegate,
Yeah, you should.
I
know it's a
mean,
delegate.
at that point, like it's pretty obvious what the T
I mean,
is.
we're going to
it's
do
not.
runtime checks anyway.
Maybe it's I don't know, the return type of the delegate, not the whole delegate. It returns a func that returns a T. I don't know.
I mean, we can name it TDelegate if you insist. that might be a compromise, right?
I don't feel strongly either way.
Yeah.
I wonder whether it's not just a theoretical issue.
Yeah, I would also say
I
like,
have never seen code that actually where T is a delegate and it's a method where I would want to call.
It's an actual issue for existing code calling existing methods. It's a theoretical issue for this case. And I don't know of any code off the top of my head that would actually hit it, but it's something that we brought up previously, so I thought I would bring it up here as well.
Yeah. Like, it's one of the reasons that we didn't add constraints to APIs like unsafe.read, unsafe.write. Like, normally we would constrain them to be where T is unmanaged, but that would make it extremely difficult to use as APIs in existing code paths because your existing code paths aren't already annotated at your own call sites with where T is unmanaged.
And you may have done
So we do
something
runtime checks instead.
if T is int, or if type of T equal type of int, then now I know I can go do this thing.
But I think
But I don't think that really happens for delegates. Yeah.
Exactly, because this one is like, frankly, this generic parameter here is not a real parameter. It's like, to make the syntax more convenient. It's not something that floats. Like the T is not flowing. It's
And
an inline.
And
it's a
I
syntax
have
thing.
trouble imagining, like, I can see it for a bunch that doing runtime specialization of generics for primitive types, like enums to their backing fields and whatnot. But it feels weird that anyone would do it for delegate. So I'm the one who added the constraint here.
And another thing we should consider is we can always remove this constraint if we find people complaining.
I mean, the argument of that thing, of Denner's thinking, though, is that basically means you will never, ever use the constraints. Because that argument can always be made. Like if you have an existing generic method context, you're always screwed. Which basically means adding new constraints is kind of useless.
Well, there might be an argument for leaving the actual constraint off, but having like an analyzer constraint or something like that that says, hey, you didn't actually validate that T is a delegate before calling this API. It might fail at runtime.
I would honestly say that maybe there's a fundamental problem with constraints because you can't cast them away. Because if you could cast them away, then it becomes implementation leaf of that method, which is fine.
Well, because in a lot of cases you don't want to cast them away. Here we don't care because the only thing that we do is we do cast the return from create delegates to it.
No, it's more like for the existing code that Tanner described, right? Like if you know your T is a delegate, but for some reason you didn't annotate yourself with that, right?
For example, you shipped a library that uses this under the covers, where you have a T and it's unconstrained because you shipped it before the constraint existed. You now can never change to use the generic version, because doing so means that you have to change yourself to also be URT delegate, which breaks anyone else upstream.
But to be perfectly honest, though, if you don't change anything whatsoever about your code will continue to work because it'll call the existing method.
Yeah, it's still just one of those cases of like, if we drop the constraint, then it works just like every other create or marshal delegate API we have.
I agree.
And you can allow users to make their code more readable and maintainable without necessarily hurting anything. You're just in the same world that every other method you expose in the framework is.
The only other counter argument I still have to that is classes like, I know on classes like unsafe we left off the constraint in order to allow it to be used in a wider variety of code. But in cases like that, we were actually enabling brand new scenarios that never could have happened in the past. The scenario clearly already works. So there's no need to drop the constraint in order to make existing code work. That's the only counter argument I can make against that.
I mean, in fact, would be the only thing that the constraint is providing, which is positive value, but like the positive value from the constraint is that while you're writing the code, you get the red squiggle telling you you passed the wrong type here, instead of when you finally hit the code at runtime, it tells you this did not make any sense. Because all of the existing things that we have on enum, from where we added generic stuff to it, which don't have constraints because they couldn't, and any existing things that are delegate types and all the things that they type of, you find out late.
So it eliminates runtime bugs at the cost of disabling a theoretical scenario that I actually think is so theoretical. I cannot imagine people having already existing code where T's are delegates. Like, what do you do with this code?
You would call the existing APIs and then cast on the way out.
That's the point, is that existing code generally doesn't use where T is delegate.
But existing code doesn't use T, it uses a type. They already know what type of delegate they want. It's a hard-coded type of.
No, they themselves have a T, and they just use type of T.
Yeah, they pass type of T in as a parameter to create delegate, and then on the way out they have parens T, parens object, and then cast.
They're basically implementing the friendly thing themselves.
Yeah, which is, sure. I guess my vote would be keep the delegate for now. It's only like, we're still in preview 1 time frame or whatever, and see what falls out over the next few months as we try to light up code around it. If it ends up being a problem within the libraries, and that's really good evidence, we should drop the constraint.
Yeah, I agree.
So we keep the constraint and then we drop it if somebody complains.
Well, if we ourselves complain too, because we have a lot of code that would benefit from this. If we have trouble scaffolding our own code against this, that tells us other people will as well.
Yes, to go with the...
It would be good data proving Tanner's argument.
Our general meta point of, if a thing is good but can be undone later for different goodness,
Yeah.
That's better than picking the one that's not undoable.
Yeah.
It might be worth noting that we've also in other places explicitly called it T delegate, not T.
Sure, we can call it delegate.
Yeah.
Sure. What other places?
For example, in Marshall.
Okay.
I think part of that is because it existed before the constraint,
Yeah.
but it still makes it clear that this is not any T, it's a T constrained to a particular
Get function
class.
pointer for delegate, yeah. Fair enough.
I'm fine with to delegate.
To delegate.
All right.
Because again, we're going to be doing the check at runtime anyway, so it's not like it's extra cost or anything. I mean, create delegate's expensive anyway. Who cares?
Now it's mine. I don't know who it was before, but now it's mine.
Apparently, we're all very hungry. We should have had donuts here.
Yes.
Sunrise Donuts.
They still around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They're over next to the old Cajun Bayou place.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore.
All right. I posted it. It's approved. Let's do one more. At least one more. But I don't think we can do much more than one more. We're not very fast today. For some reason, we are like to debate.
We are a smoke-filled room. I should just get a fog machine.
So it's when you want to cancel cancellation?
This is a throw-in version of TrySetCanceled.
Oh, we have a TrySetCanceled that takes a cancellation token.
Yeah.
The try pattern says you should have a non-try, or you should have a throwing version of your try. So
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
This seems pretty
Unless Steve
straightforward.
objects, in which case fine.
Okay.
Steve already said it's reasonable.
All right.
What exception is going to be thrown?
Whatever.
Embedded
set
operation
cancel
exception?
throws.
Yeah.
Yeah. It basically an exception saying you've already transitioned the task to a final state.
Okay.
Whatever exception that is.
Yeah, whatever the relationship is between the zero argument set canceled and try set canceled would be the same relationship between the one argument one.
Sounds good to me.
Look, Emo, no debate.
Whose stomach was that one?
Yeah, exactly.
See? Should do it more often.
You mean we should eat more often?
We should. Did none of us eat last night? Is that what happened?
I'm not hungry, and I was hungry last night before I went to bed.
Maybe you ate after you went to bed.
It's called breakfast, yeah. You didn't have. Did nobody have breakfast here?
I don't know what you.
But you probably ate at 4 a.m. or something, right?
Yeah, and then I'm hungry again right
Yeah.
now. That's why I eat normally at 11.
You say like Emo just sleeps in a fridge or something.
And what's your
Just reach
definition
over.
of breakfast?
Salmon and eggs.
Then I didn't have breakfast.
What did you have? Cereal in a bowl?
Biscotti and coffee.
That doesn't sound like
That's like
That-
half
yeah.
a breakfast. I will.
That's
What do you
like
mean? It's totally Italian breakfast.
that's a post-lunch
Breakfast.
like snack.
Yeah, that sounds like a light snack.
Actually, when you're Italian, you should not have an espresso post lunch, but it is.
What is
Maybe,
this?
maybe second breakfast, 11Z's.
Luncheon.
Proposed API. Oh, no.
Okay, this one. Do we want to review this without Stephen? Because I think Stephen might be more useful. Let's just skip this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we want to get.
Oh,
to-
Steve did drop off the call. Sad.
Well, he would have said otherwise. Here we go, Tanner. What are your thoughts on this one?
This is we're missing a couple methods. We should expose them.
So you're in support of whatever the.
Yeah, I wouldn't have marked it ready for review if I wasn't.
Well,
Let's
we
just
don't
make sure
know
Tanner's the
marked
one
what.
who marked it ready for it.
We can't tell that because all the history is lost.
Well, maybe he said so in the comments.
Yeah, basically it's just we have methods for explicitly storing scalars for most types. we're missing them specifically for int and uint. And it's not the same as convert to int32 or convert to int32 or convert to uint32.
I mean, in principle, I have nothing against it. Let me just look at the existing things.
I believe they straight up return an int rather than allowing you to explicitly store to a memory location. So it allows an optimization when, for example, if you've got an out parameter and you don't want to incur a double copy for the return.
So to be fair, the JIT actually does optimize this today.
Not always.
I've seen, at least in the code paths I've analyzed, it's pretty good about optimizing it for int, but pretty bad about optimizing it for long. Don't know why that is.
So the existing ones you have is double int and uint64. So no byte, no short, no nothing?
No, because there is no there's no instruction for explicitly storing a byte.
So the smallest one is int?
Yeah, in this case.
There's no word? No. Okay. Just keyword and keyword.
In that case, that seems like a fine API to exploit.
I mean, what's funny is when I searched for the name of the function they have here, the first hit is that this function is missing from one of the C standard, or one of somebody's runtime's header set. But like, this is in the ISA, but it wasn't in the header.
Right.
So apparently this is the thing everyone misses, or we generated ours based off of taking the bad header.
There was two parts. There was me manually going through the C intrinsics and also going through the architecture manual, and we got a number that the C intrinsics missed that the architecture manual exposes. This just happens to be one.
All right, here's another one. Tenor, you're up again.
Pretty straightforward. Basically, there's no function that allows you to multiply two longs and return a 128-bit result. This can be accelerated at the hardware level on basically every modern 64-bit computer. And so the suggestion is just to expose it. There's equivalent functionality exposed in, for example, C via APIs and stuff.
So this one would be basically, we would use intrinsics, but itself is not an intrinsic because we can implement it everywhere.
Right. Unlike most intrinsics, this is considered baseline support across all hardware. And so it's not something we would expose.
So would it make more sense to return a ulong high, ulong low tuple as opposed to out and return?
That's not how we've done any of the other APIs so far.
Okay.
And that's also not how, for example, the C++ API does it for their intrinsic.
Sure, but I mean, we're not C++.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. So I think ideally, if we ever add the int128 type, we'd add a separate overload, which was long, and then int128.
So you're basing this off of like divrem, basically?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So what do we think about the name? Is that like standard name?
BigMul appears to be the name of a thing that we already have on Math.
Yep.
It takes two ints and produces a long.
What, we already have that name?
Yep, it takes two ints and returns a long.
Never mind then. The name is gorgeous. This name is pretty and gorgeous.
Yes, I was going to say, I don't like this name, but I started by looking up.
The math class uses abbreviations all over the place. I'm surprised we actually wrote out ceiling and floor as opposed to seal.
That's probably a bug. That was probably not intentional.
So we don't return both of the low and high as an out because of perf?
Well, partially, and because that's not how, for example, BigMul, the existing one, works. It just returns a long as the result.
But it doesn't count anything.
Yeah. But also the intrinsic APIs, for example, they return it as high out low.
I mean, if this is going to be marked as an intrinsic, we can make the API surface whatever the most usable thing is and just have the JIT do magic to make it as optimal as possible, right? Is out, low, and return high the most optimal thing?
Yes, and there's actually specialized support in the hardware for just computing the high bits. That's the more common operation. For example, if you're doing floating point manually under the covers, you would do a BigMul and only take the upper bits.
So you can imagine some scenarios where you simply discard the low, and then we might even optimize that even further if we see you never use a result.
Right. You might just want a mul high.
But even if it was an out parameter, the high was a parameter. We could do that too.
Yeah, but that also makes the API less usable.
Yeah.
The most common scenario for big multiplication, when there's two scenarios. Either you want a full 128-bit result, or you just want the upper bits. There's not really a case where you just want the lower bits.
Because you could just
because that's mul.
mul. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. It's multiply.
modulo negative numbers.
It should work.
No, because the negative would have been in the high half, not in the low half.
This one is U-long. Oh, well, for U-long, this long.
Getting the low half of a 128-bit multiplied number, yeah.
Okay, sure.
The sign extension messes you up. For U-long, it's fine. It's the low half is just do what our star operator does.
Okay.
So why do we think tuple is bad? Because it doesn't optimize as nicely, or?
I think there would be more requirements to optimize it in the JIT.
Yeah, and this follows divrem as well, so yeah.
And then you cannot ignore the low.
Of course you can.
Well, you can ignore, but the JIT wouldn't know.
The JIT would have a hard time reasoning about that.
Why is it different from me discarding the out?
The JIT can watch that.
Yeah, we can see that it gets written to a single register, and then it's never used again.
In one case, you're working with two primitive types, one of which is address taken, and you can easily check for last use. In the other one, you have a struct which has two fields, and where you have to track in registration and whether it's not used. You basically have to promote it to two fields instead, or to two locals instead of being two fields. And you have to track it differently.
Overall, it's less work for the JIT because there's less indirection.
If we believe that there's a chance that in the next 10 years we will add a 128-bit numeric type, then long to that would be the right thing. And since we can't overload by return value, then I think that
the out also
the out
those
solves that
reasons.
problem. And then Christoph's alternate point is instead of out plus return, what if it was void out? And I don't have a strong opinion on that. But I think that the people want 128-bit numeric type, so we should reserve the better signature for that one is a reasonable position.
And I buy the argument that in some cases you just want the high bits.
Yep.
I think it's...
There's actually specialized instructions for that on most platforms.
All right, one more.
So for this one, for the compare intrinsics, we followed what the C APIs did, and on the SSE2, they only support 8 different overloads, and so we just exposed those directly, rather than taking an enum. Whereas with the AVX version, they extended the support to be, I think, 32 different cases. And so we didn't explode. We just take an enum as input. This is asking that we expose the existing ones as convenience methods on AVX as well, just to make the transition more convenient.
Sorry, I did not follow. Transition from what? Transitioning from C?
From SSE2 to AVX.
Oh, I see.
And it looks like the overloads here you have different method groups for nan is special versus nan is unordered.
Right.
Okay.
Can you scroll the other one?
Oh,
so I can know what we're talking about.
Yeah, you will be sad though.
Yeah. It's basically just asking that we expose all the same ones that exist under SSE2, also on AVX, for parity. And then the remaining 24 cases that AVX2 also exposes, those will only be accessible through the enum.
So hold on, like AVX inherits some SSE 4.2, right?
The difference is vector 128 versus 256.
And you were saying the vector 128 overloads already exist?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just vector 256ing things that we already have vector 128s overload across static inheritance.
Effectively.
Then seems fine.
Yeah. Are there new methods being introduced as part of this proposal that do not have 128-bit overloads?
I do not believe so.
Okay.
Let me open it and double check.
I do see that the bottom of the screen right now says the justification for these is questionable. So what's the question?
Oh, the enum that you pass in to those. But basically, if you call the overload that takes the enum, while it's verbose, is descriptive, and that's probably a good thing. whereas these are helper accelerators just to pass in the right enum value for you.
I just have like, I'll pull the thing up here.
I mean, that seems. I mean, I don't know, but I would say they are already not super usable. But
Yeah. So basically, the names between the enum and the names for these methods here differ slightly because the AVX form, because it exposes an additional 24 possible capabilities, it expands the names a little bit to make them more clear in that context. Compare ordered and compare unordered are ones where the name has no difference when you're looking at the.
so it means
enum.
if you just want to get the bigger vectors, it's not a super straightforward transition. Basically, right?
Right.
Because you have to,
The
like, kind of-
transition for that one is obvious, whereas
Yeah.
the transition for the other ones may be non-obvious.
Yeah, I would say honestly, the argument would hold more water that it's questionable is if we were to add all the overloads for things we already have enum values, but given that we already have the smaller vector sizes as overloads,
Right.
I'd rather, size extend those overloads because I think that's easier to reason about than, oh yeah, this one have to call a different method with an enum. Like that seems a bit more.
And now I know what it's talking.
Mhm.
Yeah. See, I don't even care. I just remember that there was an enum at some point. Oh, fuck.
Well, I was expecting the enum was describing like, I have a T and I'm going to tell you which T it is via enum and like, so that it was a void star collapser. But I'm a which compare mode is.
Oh, that would be a cool alias though. I'm a void star collapser. That would be my new GitHub name from now. All right. So now we have time.
Now it's lunchtime because all of us are a critical mass of us is hungry.
Yes. And it's also the donut Thursday.
The donut first thing.
So we need time. We need to go first to lunch, then for donuts.
All right. Let me first end this call here because it's getting sad.
If I were to propose array.is null or empty, would people murder me?
Array.what?
Is null or empty to be similar to string is null or empty?
I'm pretending I'm not hearing anything right now. Bye, people online.